Before we begin, I just want to say, if stories like this move you, if they make you think or feel just a little deeper, consider subscribing. It's free, and it helps us bring you more moments that matter. Now, let me take you into a story about courage, quiet strength, and a lesson a school bully will never forget. Ava Coleman stepped off the bus and pulled the straps of her backpack snug across her shoulders, the weight settling evenly against her back. The late September air in Houston carried that in-between season smell, a faint sweetness from freshly mown grass layered over the lingering warmth of sun-baked pavement. It wasn't cold, not yet, but the breeze coming through the gaps in the chain-link fence hinted that autumn was finally making its slow approach. She stood still for a heartbeat, taking in the sprawling facade of Clearview High School, its glass and brick entrance gleaming under the morning light, like it had been freshly polished for her arrival. It hadn't, of course. The school didn't know her name, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Clusters of students dotted the lawn in loose patterns, laughing, shoving, playfully leaning into each other's stories. A couple of soccer balls rolled lazily along the grass, chased by sneakers squeaking faintly against the dew. Somewhere near the steps, the cheer squad was already practicing formations, their synchronized voices cutting clean through the ambient chatter. None of it felt like it belonged to her. She wasn't here to belong. Fourth school in 3 years. That thought sat heavy in her mind as she started forward. Other kids moved because their parents had promotions or wanted bigger houses in better neighborhoods. She moved because sometimes the fastest way to survive a mess was to leave it behind entirely. Her mom used to call it starting fresh, but Ava knew it was just another way to say, you can't fix what doesn't want to be fixed. The straps of her backpack pressed into her shoulders as she crossed the courtyard. She kept her chin level, eyes ahead. If she did it right, she'd slip into the current of this place, without making a ripple. A couple of heads turned as she passed, some curious, some calculating. But she didn't meet their gaze. The building loomed closer, its main doors framed in dark metal and smudged glass that reflected back the restless movements of students rushing inside. Once she stepped through those doors, the temperature changed. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pencil shavings, floor wax, and the metallic tang of old lockers. The hallways were alive with motion, doors slamming shut, sneakers squeaking on polished tile lockers opening with sharp metallic clanks. A teacher's voice rose briefly over the din before being swallowed again. Ava held her folded schedule in one hand, scanning it without really reading. She'd already memorized the important party locker assignment lunch period and the quickest path to the back corner of the cafeteria. Years of moving had taught her the same first-day routine map, the terrain, find the quiet spaces, identify the people who set the rules here. Every school had them. She was halfway down the main corridor when she spotted him, the boy leaning against a row of lockers like it was his personal throne. Even from this distance, his presence carried weight. Broad-shouldered, clean-cut, wearing the red and white Letterman jacket like a badge of office. Trent Morgan. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew his type instantly. The laugh that broke from his mouth was quick-practiced, designed to hook everyone within earshot. His friends, most of them teammates in matching jackets, clustered around him like satellites, their chuckles coming just a little too loud, just a little too eager. That told her everything she needed to know. She angled to pass without slowing, but fate, or something like it, cut across her path. A hard shoulder bumped into hers, sharp enough to knock the books from her arm. They hit the floor with a flat slap, pages skittering across the tile. The sound drew a few heads, a couple of smirks. Well, look what we've got here. The voice was smooth, almost amused, but there was steel hidden in it. She didn't need to look up to know it was him. She crouched, gathering her things with deliberate calm, stacking them neatly before standing. He was closer now, arms folded, that half-smile curling his mouth like he'd been born with it. His eyes tracked her movements, weighing her. "I don't think I've seen you around," he said, his tone pitched just loud enough for the hallway to hear. "That's possible," she replied, tucking the last notebook under her arm and stepping past him. "Hey, Manners," he called after her, his voice cutting through the noise. "I asked you a question." She kept moving. People like him thrived on reaction, push, react, push harder. The only way to win was to refuse the first push. 2 steps later, the tug came. Firm, deliberate, pulling her backpack just enough to make her stop. Conversations around them faltered. She turned slowly, letting her gaze meet his. For a split second, she saw it, a flicker of curiosity beneath the confidence, the tiniest shift in the set of his jaw. "You shouldn't have done that," she said evenly, her voice low, but carrying. One eyebrow lifted. "And why's that, you'll see." It wasn't loud, but it landed with weight. For a heartbeat, the corner of his mouth twitched as if searching for the perfect reply, but the bells shrieked overhead, scattering the tension like marbles across the floor. Ava stepped around him and merged into the flow of students without looking back. By the time second period ended, Ava had already mapped most of the main building in her head. Years of being the new kid had trained her eyes to pick up the details. Other students ignored the blind corners where teachers couldn't see, the narrow back stairwells with peeling paint, where you could disappear between classes, the clusters of lockers that belonged to the social elite versus the ones shoved near the utility closets. Clearview High was no different. She kept her pace, even her step soft against the scuffed tile, while her eyes caught the subtle signals, the way certain students lingered by Trent's locker, waiting for a nod or a joke before moving on. The way others took detours to avoid him entirely. He wasn't just popular, he was a gravitational center, pulling some people in while pushing others to the outer edges. At lunch, she claimed a table near the back of the cafeteria, the kind of spot you could abandon without anyone noticing. The room smelled faintly of fries and pizza grease, a mix of cafeteria chatter and the occasional squeal from a chair dragged too hard across the linoleum. She kept her head low over a paperback, but her ears stayed tuned to the currents around her. It didn't take long for the energy in the room to shift. The laughter at Trent's table was louder than the rest, rolling over the other conversations in waves. She didn't have to look to know his friends were eating it up, every punchline, every exaggerated gesture. It was only when the sound sharpened into pointed words that she glanced up. He was looking right at her. "Yeah, new girl thinks she's too good to say hello," he was saying, his voice pitched to Carrie. His friend snickered on cue. "Probably thinks she's mysterious or something." Ava didn't flinch. She let her gaze drift right past him, as if his words had been meant for someone else. The thing about people like Trent was that ignoring them wasn't just a defense, it was a challenge. It told them they weren't in control. Sure enough, he stood a moment later, tray in hand, and started across the cafeteria. The space between them seemed to narrow faster than it should, the buzz of conversations dimming in her awareness. He stopped at the edge of her table, blocking her light. "You lost?" he asked, the smirk returning. "Only people who sit back here are loners or troublemakers." "Which one are you?" Ava closed her book, slowly marking her place with one finger. "Neither," she said. "I'm just someone who prefers quiet." He leaned down slightly, bracing one hand on the table. "You know, at Clearview, it's not a good idea to stay invisible. People forget you exist." "That's the point," she replied, her tone flat but steady. For a moment, he studied her, as if deciding whether she was worth the effort. Then his smirk widened. "We'll see how long that lasts." He walked away, but she noticed the glances he threw over his shoulder, like he couldn't quite let her out of his sight. She watched him rejoin his friends, sliding back into his seat, as if nothing had happened. Ava picked up her book again, but inside she was already adjusting her mental map. This wasn't just about avoiding him anymore. This was about holding her ground without giving him an opening to strike. She knew his type too well, and she knew the best way to deal with him wasn't to fight on his terms. It was to wait until he was too off balance to know which way the hit had come from. The next few days slid by in a rhythm that was both predictable and tense. Ava moved through her classes like a shadow present, but never lingering, eyes always scanning without seeming to. She spoke when necessary, answered questions in a voice that was steady, but offered no hooks for conversation. Most students eventually lost interest. Most students, except Trent. He didn't push every day. Sometimes it was just a passing comment dropped loud enough for her to hear as she walked by. Other times it was a nudge in the hallway, his shoulder brushing hers as if by accident. None of it was enough to draw a reaction in front of teachers, but it was enough to remind her he was watching. By Friday, Ava could feel the cafeteria glances before they landed. She'd just unwrapped her sandwich when the sound of an engine outside made her pause. It wasn't the rattling hum of a student's old sedan or the sharp buzz of a dirt bike. This was deeper, heavier, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor tiles. The room's attention shifted toward the wall of windows overlooking the student parking lot. Conversations thinned. Chairs scraped as a few kids stood for a better view. Even Trent's table went quiet. Ava turned her head casually, following the other's gaze. A matte black Dodge Charger Hellcat rolled into the lot, like it owned every inch of pavement it touched. The sunlight slid across its hood, catching on the subtle curve of its bodywork. The engine purred in a way that was both smooth and dangerous, a sound that didn't beg for attention so much as demanded. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, broad, carrying himself with a kind of ease that made people notice, without quite knowing why. He wore a plain black t-shirt that fit just enough to show muscle without bragging about it. Dark jeans and a pair of aviator sunglasses that reflected the sky back at anyone who looked too long. His head turned toward the school entrance, like he already knew where he was going. Ava's stomach tightened, but her face didn't show it. She recognized that walk instantly. Victor Steele never moved like he was in a hurry, yet somehow he was always exactly where he meant to be before anyone could stop him. She hadn't expected him today. Outside, he shut the car door with an easy swing, and the sound sharp in the quiet lot. He slipped his keys into his pocket, glanced at the student staring through the glass, and gave a faint, almost amused nod before heading toward the main entrance. The cafeteria buzzed again, voices rising in speculation. "Who is that someone near?" Ava asked. "Looks like trouble," another replied. Ava returned her attention to her sandwich, but her mind was already working. Victor's appearance here was not a coincidence. He didn't just happen to visit schools. If he was here, it meant something had shifted, and shifts always brought cracks in the ground under people like Trent. From across the room, Trent's eyes narrowed as he watched Victor disappear inside the building. For the first time all week, Ava saw something in him that wasn't smug or calculating. It looked a lot like uncertainty. Victor's presence didn't blend into the school's backdrop the way most visitors did. The moment he stepped through the cafeteria doors, the hum of voices dimmed again, curiosity pulling students' attention toward him like a magnet. He didn't look around nervously like someone unfamiliar with high school chaos. He walked with the same unhurried confidence. Ava remembered each step, measured shoulders, relaxed gaze steady. Even in a room full of teenagers, he somehow commanded the space without raising his voice or making a single, abrupt movement. The principal, Mr. Harkins, appeared almost instantly from the hallway, his smile wide but a touch too tight. "Mr. Steele," he greeted, voice pitched in that careful blend of respect and caution reserved for people you didn't want to upset. "This is a surprise." Victor extended a hand, shaking firmly, but without lingering. "Didn't want to disrupt your day," he said, though his eyes were already scanning the cafeteria, taking in faces, reading the room the way other men read contracts. They landed on Ava. For just a fraction of a second, her expression softened, her guard lowering in a way no one else would notice, unless they'd been watching her for days. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual steady calm. Victor's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but carried the weight of recognition. "Thought I'd check in on a family friend," he said, his voice directed toward Harkins, but his gaze still holding Ava's. The principal nodded quickly, though it was clear he was curious. "Of course. Can I have someone fetch them for you?" "No need," Victor replied, taking a step forward, his boots sounding deliberate against the tile. He stopped at the far side of Ava's table, the distance between them, holding an unspoken familiarity that made more than one student glance between them. Ava looked up slowly, meeting his eyes. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "Didn't want to give you a chance to tell me not to," he said evenly, the corner of his mouth lifting. Trent, still seated with his friends, but leaning forward, now studied the exchange like a hawk. The cocky tilt of his head was gone, replaced by a narrowed focus. Something about Victor's tone, the way Ava spoke to him, didn't fit into the neat hierarchy Trent had built for himself at Clearview. Victor rested a hand lightly on the back of an empty chair, but didn't sit. "Mind if I borrow you for a bit?" Ava rose without hesitation, sliding her book into her bag. She didn't glance at anyone as she stepped away from the table, but she could feel the weight of the cafeteria's attention trailing behind them. As they left, she caught the faint sound of Trent whispering something to one of his friends. It didn't matter what he said. She knew his type. He'd spend the rest of the day trying to figure out who Victor was and why he'd walked into her life so easily. What Trent didn't know was that Victor Steele was a storm in a calm suit, quiet, until the moment he decided not to be. And if Trent kept pushing, sooner or later, he'd find out exactly what that meant. Victor led Ava out through the side doors, away from the cafeteria's watchful eyes, and the hum of speculation that was already building behind them. The afternoon air was warm, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass from the athletic field. They walked toward the far end of the parking lot, where the Hellcat waited in its reserved, commanding silence. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of their footsteps on the cracked pavement filled the space between them. "You've been here 3 weeks," Victor finally said, his tone low, deliberate. "And already you're on someone's radar." Ava kept her gaze ahead. "It's a small town. People notice new faces." "Not like this," he countered. "I saw him watching you. The kid with the Letterman jacket." "Trent Morgan," she said simply. Victor's jaw flexed, as if he was locking something in place. And she replied, "He's used to people reacting to him. I don't." Victor stopped walking. She turned to face him, meeting his steady, assessing gaze. "You think you can handle it?" he asked. "I am handling it," she said, her voice calm but edged with a quiet certainty. "If I push back too soon, I become the story. Right now, he's just digging his own hole." Victor's expression shifted just slightly, but enough for her to catch it. A flicker of pride. "You sound like me." She gave a faint smile. "I learned from the best." They reached the car. Victor leaned against the hood, folding his arms. The late sun caught the planes of his face, the faint scars near his temple marks from a life that didn't need to be explained to her. "I didn't come here just to check in," he said after a pause. "I heard things. About him, about the way he treats people. I don't like it. You're not here to fight my battles, Ava said. Not unless you want me to, he replied. They stood in the quiet for a few beats. Ava glanced back toward the school, imagining Trent inside, probably already weaving a story about who Victor was, an older brother, an uncle. Something worse. The unknown would gnaw at him. That was good. Uncertainty was a weapon, and she'd learned to let it work before making her move. Finally, Victor pushed off the car. All right, I'll let you play it your way. But if he crosses a line, he won't get the chance. Ava said, cutting him off gently but firmly. Victor nodded, unlocking the car. That's my girl. She didn't get in, though. Not yet. She just stood there, feeling the balance in the air shift ever so slightly. If Trent thought she was alone in this, he was already 2 steps behind. By Monday morning, the atmosphere at Clearview High had shifted in ways most students couldn't articulate, but instinctively felt. The easy confidence Trent usually carried into the building was still there, but thinner, like a smile stretched too far. Rumors had started almost immediately after Friday's lunch. Ava had caught bits of them drifting through the hallways. Some guy rolled up in a Hellcat, looked like he could break someone in half. Ava was talking to him like they've known each other forever. Trent didn't bother hiding the fact that he'd heard them too. If anything, he seemed determined to prove none of it mattered. He made sure to walk past Ava's locker that morning, tossing a casual, "Hope you had a nice weekend" mystery girl with just enough sarcasm to make his friends laugh. Ava didn't look up from the book she was sliding into her bag. Better than yours, probably. The chuckles faltered. It wasn't loud, but the precision of her reply landed like a dart. Trent's smile tightened for a moment before he recovered. Cute, he said, moving on. But his friend's eyes lingered on her longer than his did, and she filed that away. At lunch, she noticed something else. He was watching her more than usual, but not with the same easy arrogance. He was studying her, like he was trying to fit puzzle pieces together in his head. Every time she caught his gaze, she didn't glare back or look away quickly. She just held it for a beat, calm and unreadable, before returning to whatever she was doing. It was subtle, but it worked. By the 3rd time it happened, he shifted in his seat, breaking eye contact first. The thing about Trent and people like him was that their power came from controlling the narrative. Take away the predictability, and they started to slip. That afternoon, as students spilled out into the parking lot, Ava caught a glimpse of him leaning against his car, talking to a couple of upperclassmen she didn't recognize. He glanced at her, once said something to the group, and they all laughed. Victor's lesson echoed in her mind. You don't always win by striking first. Sometimes you win by making them swing too soon. She gave him a single neutral nod as she passed, not slowing her step. That tiny acknowledgement, neither warm nor dismissive, would itch at him. He'd spend the night wondering what it meant. And when he finally decided to push harder, she'd be ready. What Trent didn't realize was that Ava wasn't just avoiding his traps. She was building one of her own. By Thursday, Trent's patience had thinned to nothing. The rumor mill hadn't died down, it had only grown teeth. Somehow the story of Victor's appearance had twisted in the telling. Depending on who you asked, he was Ava's brother, her boyfriend, a famous ex-con, a pro fighter, or some kind of underground racer. None of it was true, and all of it gnawed at Trent for the same reason Ava didn't seem bothered. She didn't even try to correct the rumors. That morning, she was at her locker when a shadow fell over her. You know, Trent said, voice pitched for her ears, only if you wanted to make friends, there are easier ways than bringing your whatever he is to school. Ava shut her locker slowly, meeting his eyes without a flicker of fear. If you wanted to scare me, there are better ways than pretending you know anything about my life. The hallway around them caught the tension. Students nearby started to linger, pretending to check their phones or rearrange books just to hear what came next. Trent leaned closer, his grin tight. I don't need to know about your life. I just need to make sure you know your place. Before she could answer, the first bell rang, breaking the moment. Ava simply stepped past him, her shoulder brushing his as she walked away. No rush, no retreat, just a deliberate pace that left him standing there, jaw tight. At lunch, Trent made his move. She was halfway through her meal when a loud crash rang out behind her. She turned in time to see one of the cafeteria staff stumble a tray of food splattering across the floor. Behind him, grinning like he'd just pulled off a great prank, stood Trent. His friends were laughing, but it was the kind of laugh people use when they're not sure if they should be laughing. The staff member, a man in his late 50s, muttered an apology as he bent down to clean up the mess. But Ava caught the way Trent had accidentally bumped into him. The smug satisfaction on his face was unmistakable. She set down her fork, stood up, and crossed the room. Not fast, not aggressive, just enough to draw eyes without looking like she was trying. When she reached the staff member, she crouched down beside him and started picking up the scattered plates. "Let me help," she said softly. He tried to wave her off, embarrassed. "It's fine, I've got it." "It's fine," she repeated, voice steady. "I've got time." By the time they'd stacked the mess onto the tray, the room had gone quieter. She stood turned and handed the tray directly to Trent. "Since you caused it," she said, her tone almost casual, "you can finish cleaning it up." A ripple went through the cafeteria. It wasn't loud, just a shift in air, the kind of silent verdict that told everyone they'd just seen something they weren't supposed to forget. Trent's smirk faltered. Just for a second. But Ava saw it. She didn't wait for his reply. She turned and walked back to her table, the moment locked in place. Victor's words echoed in her head. You don't have to raise your voice to take someone's power away. You just have to make them show who they really are. By the next morning, what had happened in the cafeteria was everywhere. It wasn't just gossip now, it had become the story of the week. Ava had barely stepped through the front doors when she heard it whispered behind her. Did you see the look on Trent's face? She handed it to him, like she owned him. He didn't even say anything, just stood there. She didn't acknowledge any of it. That was part of the strategy, never feed the fire, just let it burn. Trent, however, had a different reaction. By second period, he was snapping at his friends, slamming his locker shut harder than necessary, and throwing snide comments at anyone he thought might have been laughing at him. The problem was, everyone might have been laughing at him. The uncertainty gnawed at him worse than outright ridicule. In gym class, Ava caught him watching her from across the court, his jaw tight, his shoulders hunched. The mask of effortless confidence he usually wore was cracked, and she could see the frustration bleeding through. By lunchtime, the pressure was obvious. He tried to make some loud joke at her expense from across the cafeteria, but it landed flat too, forced, too desperate. His friends laughed out of habit, not amusement. That was when Ava knew he was spiraling. And then, like clockwork, Victor reappeared. It was after school. Ava was walking toward the parking lot when she heard the low rumble of the Hellcat's engine. She turned to see it glide into a spot along the curb, its black paint catching the last shards of sunlight. Victor stepped out, sunglasses on expression unreadable. He didn't call out to her, didn't wave, just leaned against the car as if he had all the time in the world. "You've stirred things up," he said when she approached. "I didn't do anything," Ava replied evenly. He did it to himself. Victor's smile was faint but approving. That's why it's working. But remember, pressure makes people unpredictable. If he's going to swing, it'll be soon. I'm ready, she said. Good, he replied, because next time I'm not just watching. She didn't have to ask what he meant. There was something in his tone, a promise that told her when the moment came, Trent wouldn't just lose his hold over her. He'd lose it in front of everyone. The kind of loss you don't come back from. The breaking point came the following Friday. It was supposed to be just another ordinary lunch period, but Ava noticed the tension in the air before she even sat down. Conversations seemed sharper eyes flicking between tables, whispers running under the hum of cafeteria noise. She saw Trent near the vending machines, pacing like a caged animal. His friends hovered close, speaking to him in low tones, but he brushed them off. His gaze kept darting toward her table. Then, without warning, he moved. It wasn't subtle. He strode across the room like he owned it, shoving past two freshmen without a glance. The cafeteria quieted just enough for the sound of his sneakers scuffing the floor to carry. He stopped right in front of her table. You think you're clever, don't you? His voice was low but sharp, like he wanted everyone to hear without actually shouting. Ava didn't look up right away. She finished the last bite of her sandwich, set it down, and then met his eyes. I think you're louder than you are smart. A few people gasped quietly. Trent leaned in his face inches from hers. You have no idea who you're messing with. That was when a shadow fell across the table. Victor. He didn't say a word at first, just stepped between them, the air around him suddenly heavier. Trent froze, caught off guard by how quickly he'd appeared. Back up, Victor said, his voice even, but carrying across the room. Trent's jaw tightened. Who even are you? Victor's reply was simple. The guy who's telling you this is over. Silence stretched. The whole cafeteria was watching now. Trent's bravado flickered, but pride wouldn't let him step down. She's not untouchable, he said, jerking his chin toward Ava. Victor didn't move, but his presence alone was enough to press Trent backward a half step. She doesn't need to be untouchable, he said. She just needs the truth on her side. And you've already given that to her? It landed like a punch without contact. Students exchanged looks, already connecting the dots, the cafeteria incident, the hallway standoffs, the way Trent had been unraveling all week. Ava stood sliding her bag over her shoulder. She didn't need to say much, just one line as she passed him. You're done here. Trent didn't follow. He couldn't. The room had already made its judgment. Victor walked with her out of the cafeteria, the low hum of conversations rising behind them. By Monday, the story would be everywhere, and Trent Morgan's reign over Clearview High would be over. Not because Ava had fought him with fists or shouted him down, but because she'd let him show everyone exactly who he was. That afternoon, the sky over Clearview was a deep, late summer blue, the kind that made the air feel both heavy and alive. Ava and Victor walked side by side toward the Hellcat, and the sounds of the school fading behind them. When they reached the car, Victor leaned against the door instead of opening it. You know he said you didn't need me to step in back there? Ava glanced at him, a faint smile playing at her lips. I know, but it was nice to have backup. Victor chuckled softly. What you did that's harder than throwing a punch. You let him tear himself apart. Most people don't have the patience for that. It wasn't patience, she said after a beat. It was knowing what mattered. I didn't need to win in front of him. I needed to win in front of everyone else. Victor nodded slowly, the hint of pride in his eyes. And you did. He's not going to touch you again. Not because he's scared of me, but because he's scared of what everyone saw. For a moment, they just stood there, the quiet hum of distant traffic in the air. Then Victor tilted his head, studying her. So, what's next? Ava looked past him at the stretch of road leading away from the school. I'm just going to live my life. And if anyone else tries to come at me like that, she shrugged, a small spark in her expression. I'll know how to handle it. Victor smiled. Good answer. He opened the car door for her. As they drove off, Ava felt the weight she'd carried since her first day at Clearview dissolve. This wasn't just about Trent Morgan anymore. It was about every time someone thought they could define her, diminish her, or make her doubt herself. She'd learned something priceless. You don't always need to match someone's volume to shut them down. Sometimes the quietest response leaves the loudest echo. The Hellcat roared onto the open road as sunlight flashing across its hood, and Ava let the wind wash over her. Behind them, the school shrank into the distance. Ahead of them, the horizon stretched wide and open, waiting for whatever came next.